Hi, I'm Ben. I suffer from a condition called writer's block. It strikes when I'm at work. That's why I choose Canva Magic Write. It works fast, generating text in seconds, thanks to AI.
Common side effects include increased productivity, compliments from coworkers, feelings of satisfaction.
Now I can say bye-bye to writer's block.
Ask your boss if Canva Magic Write is right for you at canva.com, designed for work.
Canva.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive deep into the secrets of the craft and give you our perspective on some industry topics. We're always in service of marketers that are responsible for audio. We call them the Chief Audio Officer. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road. We have a very special lineup of people. Let's just start with Spencer Semonson, media buyer and planner extraordinaire. Welcome, Spencer. We also have the wise Neal Lucey, our head of strategy and insights at Oxford Road. Neal, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
And somebody put in here Funkle Kyle Jelinek. I had Uncle, but I guess Funkle is probably better.
I added that. I figured
client services. I think that was a good call. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here,
also
Dan.
our editor in chief of the newsletter, The Influencer, which you must be subscribed to if you're listening here. And we have the great James Cridland, our favorite audio futurologist. This says radio futurologist, but I think he's post radio as he's post Android. We're all living in the future here. So James, we're glad to have you back, and we're excited to have you in the flesh, as they say at the upcoming podcast moment. Yeah.
No, that should be fun.
Have you got anything that you want to recommend people show up to while you're in town? If people want to come and like get your autograph or ask you a question or?
Well, there is this English guy talking just before Amy Poehler. I mean, obviously everybody will be going for Amy Poehler and nobody will be going for me, but there we are. I've got 10 minutes prior to that talking through the Podnews report card and what podcasters think of the big podcast platforms. It's not good news for YouTube, let me tell you.
Yeah, we should get into that. Well, hey, what's so great about podcasts? We get special access to stuff. You're suddenly opening for Amy Poehler. You didn't even know that was on your radar probably a few months ago, but look at you.
I know.
You're making it into the big time. Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're going to talk about some fun stuff today. Not so fun, Rooster Teeth shutting down, or at least a large part of their operations. We're going to talk about how to win trust with every listen. And if true, crime pays, but how much? We're going to discuss that as well. And Spotify's podcast dominance. That's never come up before. So some of this will be new angles on old topics, but there's some new information to cover in the meantime. How many of you got to watch the Oscars 3 nights before our publishing of this episode? I see a hand. I see another hand. I see 3 hands. You guys got to remember, most people are not watching. They're listening. But 3 out of 4, so 4 out of 5. And did anybody get to see the ad by SiriusXM? And if so, do you have any points of view? We'll start with you, Kyle.
I did see it. I watched the Oscars. I mean, I think the ad, SiriusXM is doing a decent job of trying to connect with people. I thought it was a touching ad. I don't know, for those who didn't see it, it shows the progression of a young girl and her life through music and the various stages of her life in a really beautiful way. It connected. I'm obviously a music fan for our viewers out there. And I don't know, maybe because I have kids that are getting older, I got the feels when I watched it, just kind of seeing like the soundtrack of our lives and how that they're moments in time that you can reflect back on.
Brought to you by SiriusXM. Neal, what did you think of it?
Similar reaction to the ad itself. And then kind of as a media planning dork, I thought about, okay, the Oscars as an environment for SiriusXM, who their core audience is, and their core audience is definitely Gen X plus, they even say this in their earnings report, affluent. So it just made a ton of sense to have a premium service in a premium environment. And, for Sirius XM, where the service is around 34 million subscribers, and it's been that way for a long time. They need to grow. I mean, everybody needs to grow. So kudos to them for going into an environment like the Oscars to capture that attention and try to lure new subscribers into their franchise.
Very good. James, any commentary on the Sirius
Yeah, I mean,
XM?
I had some of the out of home activations and stuff like that in the Podnews newsletter earlier on in the week, and they look really smart. And I'm sure that the 635 people who Sirius XM fired last year will be delighted at the way that their money is being spent.
Fair enough. Spencer, anything you want to share?
I just love that they decided to do something cinematic with the time that they had. That was really smart given the venue. And I mean, I recently won an award, so I totally get what that is like, and I really appreciated it for what it was,
By the way, you're only going to get like a quarter of the magic here if you're not watching on YouTube, which I guess podcasts can be on YouTube. I want to say one thing about the ad, and then we're actually going to talk about that very topic and the breaking story from James through Podnews this morning, talking about Joe Rogan and video on YouTube. But I do want to say on the serious thing, look, I guess to James's point, is it in bad taste to spend money on brand marketing within a memory of recent layoffs? I don't know. I don't know if I have an opinion about that. I think it depends on a lot of variables that I don't have access to. But I do think the ad, to me, seemed like a good brand fit. The environment felt right. I don't know if it's just because I see everything through the lens of like having to prove out ROI, but I think one of the elements, one of the things we talk about in audiolytics is this concept of onlyness, and like, what can you say that all of your competitors could not say? And the question I have when I see an ad like that is, how many other companies could I have put in place of SiriusXM, and would it still be true? And if so, you're playing with a lofty strategy that's going to take a long time to pay back before people start associating positive memories from music with your specific platform that serves music, when there are so many other places to get it right now. So I do respect a good brand ad that makes a good message, but hopefully it's something that you can really set yourself apart with. And I don't know that they were able to clearly articulate in that message what it is that makes them stand out as a provider of audio content against everybody else. So that's my point of view on that one.
I would offer up
Yeah.
that Spotify, a company that SiriusXM owns, Pandora, others could certainly lay claim to that territory, but they did it. So,
So first dibs, like
Yeah.
the old deodorant story is that in the 50s, one of Ivory or whoever decided to start publicizing the fact that there was a lather that was good for your skin while you were cleaning, and it turned out everybody had the same thing. They were just the first to say it. So if you're the first to say it, can you own that feature? And that's possible. I would still posit that that's a big feature to own. So yeah, they're the only ones doing that, but that's an ambitious play. Whether or not they were able to achieve that, we'll see. Okay, I want to move on, but appreciate the back and forth on that. James, you provided some information today about whether shows like this that we call podcasts, what do consumers actually think when they think about YouTube and the shows that they get on YouTube? Are those podcasts? And so do you mind just illuminating us a little bit on what it was you were reporting there?
Well, really, I was reporting on Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan has been making, obviously, a number of changes since he no longer was a Spotify exclusive last month. So the audio has been available everywhere ever since that announcement. And as of a couple of days ago, all of his videos are now available on YouTube. I was thinking that probably Spotify were going to keep the videos as exclusive content. But that is not the case. And every single video from the Joe Rogan Experience is now available on podcast, on YouTube. What I did notice, though, is that on YouTube, you can mark a show as a podcast so that it appears in the podcast section, so that it's promoted in the same place as other podcasts. And whoever has uploaded all of the Joe Rogan Experience shows back again hasn't actually marked it as a podcast at all. And so I suppose that then leads on to, well, is it a podcast anyway? What is a podcast? Do we care? At the end of the day, if consumers think that it might be a podcast, then, does it really matter what five folk on a podcast say? I don't know, but I thought it was interesting that if you go to youtube.com/podcast, which is the place that you should be going to see what YouTube think are podcasts, Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast in the world, is not there. And that's quite a thing.
Interesting. And your perspective, or at least what you've been able to find in the data, is that that's user error. That wasn't a YouTube choice where they didn't let him in.
I mean,
it's like somebody
it's up to
screwed it
the
up.
user. Yeah, it's up to the user what they mark as a podcast, up to the creator. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I come at this in terms of what a podcast is. I come at this from, whatever the consumer thinks it is, that's what we should respect. I think it, it's weird that YouTube haven't been able to even convince the biggest podcast in the world that they are actually a podcast, and to tick that button, though, which I think says quite a lot for the future of where YouTube is actually going.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like should be a quick fix for the Rogan team if they put that together or read the newsletters. I imagine they do. But I do think that the deeper piece of this that you're talking about, what is a podcast? It's whatever the people think it is, right? We have to listen to the audience. We have to listen to the customer. And the overwhelming stats that we keep seeing coming out recently are that, 69 to 75% I'm seeing of consumers believe that video or no video, it's a podcast. And so therefore, we get real excited about this topic, and maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should just listen to the end user and let them guide us, right?
Yep. I would say that the industry, we love to identify things, but at the end of the day, the consumer gets the decision on what it is, right?
Yeah, we don't want to fight that.
And the consumer thinks that podcasts are both video and audio by a large margin.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a lot
that I have is what on YouTube, when you're using YouTube generally, what is a podcast and what isn't a podcast? And that's a different conversation to whether Joe Rogan is still a podcast if he's on YouTube, which clearly he is. But I watch a lot of things on YouTube which I wouldn't call a podcast, and a lot of things which I would call a podcast. There's been a bunch of research. I think Signal Hill Insights researched something a couple of months ago, which basically said that if you can see the microphones in the video, then it's a podcast, which I think is an interesting view.
If the host is wearing a headphone and has a microphone in front of them, it's a podcast.
So if I have my AirPods on, it's no longer a podcast. The irony. Sick.
I think we solved it. We put it to bed. Done. We know now.
Yeah.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
We don't ever have to talk about this again.
Hooray.
Kyle,
and we have two people that allow this to be a podcast.
Right, exactly. All right. Kyle, tell us about what a podcast is. No, you've got some updates about Acast and things that make listeners fall in love. So what's happening here?
What's your sign, Dan?
Sagittarius, I think. December
I'm a
14th.
Gemini. That's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of music do you like?
Shouldn't you already know that?
I think I do. I just want to hear it.
I don't want to say.
You don't have to. It's fine.
I'll tell you one
Acast,
part of music I don't like is our intro music, but it's going to change soon. It's happening.
True.
It's
It's
going to
happening.
happen. Yeah.
So Acast, that was me on a first date, and I'm terrible. Obviously, I'm more of a slow burn. And Acast.
I was also me on a first date.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you?
Oh, so Acast, they put out a paper about likening your first podcast read as like your first date. So they give tips to new advertisers in the podcast of, hey, you got 30 seconds to make a great impression. And they give you thoughts of like putting in humor and telling a story and just engaging with the audience in a way that will make them like you, which I think is all good. It falls in line similar to our ad structure that we call Audiolytics. What it doesn't do very well is giving the host an opportunity to interject. And that's what I found, like a proper onboarding is the key to making a great first impression on your podcasting, making sure the host has tried your product, make sure that they have enough latitude within the script that they can go off script and talk candidly about it is key. And God forbid, don't ever try to throw your humor in and try to write a Joe Rogan ad because you think Joe Rogan will say it this way, because he never does. It never comes off that way. But that's my take. When I'm onboarding clients, that's the way to make a great first impression.
Yeah, it seems like for the CAO, I think the message is from the point of view I'm hearing from you, and I agree with, is if you're looking for them to make a great impression with your ad, first you need to make a great impression on the host. And that comes with not just sending them product, but actually giving them the right context around their product and any personal touches. I really believe people responding kind. And if you show them that you really care about them as a particular ambassador for you, and you show that you took time to welcome them into your world, they're probably going to want to do the same thing when it's time to talk about you. But I think sometimes like the advertisers are just a number and the hosts are just a number, and it all becomes so impersonal, right? So I think it starts with a personal relationship being built potentially through an agency or through sales reps and a brand and the host. And then when the host steps up to the mic to finally explain it, they're able to do that with a little more connection out of the gate. These things, it takes time to build a relationship, but you can be proactive at the beginning. And I think it's a two-way street.
Yeah, and shameless plug, last week's edition of Media Roundtable, we actually interviewed a podcast host who broke down exactly like what she's looking for from the advertisers in order to get the most authentic read. So for the CEOs listening, that's definitely worth a re-listen if you missed it.
3
For
points.
sure.
She wants 3 bullet points. Give her 5.
No more than 3.
Tuning out.
But times 5, but yeah, for sure we can do that. Okay, Spencer, tune this out at your own peril. What's happening over here?
What's happening over here is that SiriusXM has a new study for us about how women are increasingly drawn to podcasts. And there's a 27% surge in weekly listens since 2020. I found this a very interesting read for a couple of reasons. They talk a lot about community building and the intimacy of audio and how basically you're being a part of that community when you are brought in to a women-only space. I mean, that's very true also for any marginalized people's spaces, and there's extreme spending power that's left on the table. We've had, report after report and podcast after podcast about how this Hispanic community is an underutilized demographic that we don't hit enough. And when you find hosts that have that intimacy, you are basically aligning with people who are more trusted than people outside of those communities. So if you're looking for, some planning dollars and you're trying to reach a demographic that you haven't spoken to in a while, maybe, take some time, find out what we like, figure out, what kind of first date we want to go on with a podcast ad, and make sure it's not the guy who lives in his mom's basement and tries to eat his own toenails during the date. I mean, it's common sense, but we appreciate it.
Here. Neal, you had some commentary on this, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that, I mean, for a long time, and to some degree surprising to me, podcasting was definitely skewed more male, right? Um, and that gap has closed. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to reach different audiences through podcasts. I love the fact that, you know, the community aspect of podcasting, which resonates with females, is all things that, you know, that are important to marketers, and marketers should consider when they're going into podcasting.
I remember when we first started, we could only advertise to incels living in their mom's basement eating their
Correct.
toenails, like you're saying, Spencer.
That was the
Like,
primary demographic the podcast
we-
reached.
Yeah, we could sell underwear and razors and maybe a couple other things, but you know, we tried a few female focused brands at that time. We could not make it work. Those days are over. And to me, I read this, I'm like, oh, we've known that for a long time, but it's good that it's getting out there, because
No, it's true. It was a real problem. We were like, well, it was geeks and gamers and comedy, and that was kind of it. And then we would, you know, we would work with an advertiser who was trying to reach women, and it was like, well, we might know 2 or 3 of them, you know, that'll help you. But it really feels like podcast today, it seems to me, in the numbers I've looked at, and you guys can challenge me here, but it really feels like it's a pretty representative sample of just people, and whoever you're trying to target, you now have enough critical mass to run an effective campaign, talking directly to those individuals in at a pretty sizable level of reach. So
Yeah.
One
maybe,
other,
maybe not fully represented 65 plus, but
sure, yeah.
many other
that's true.
demographics.
No, you're right. You're right. 65 plus is
Mhm.
still very much a radio audience. But you know, every day someone is passing out of that demographic and someone is coming into the
Absolutely.
podcast demographic. So it's definitely where it's going.
I would
Yeah.
also say that given kind of your experience from years ago, and we talked about this with Pete, that there's advertisers who've tried podcasts who it didn't work. We had a female, so this could be years ago. We had a female, our brand is female targeted. We tried podcasts, it didn't work. Well,
Yeah.
maybe it's time to rethink that and jump back in.
big time.
No doubt. No doubt. Neal, while we've got you, tell us about what's happening in trust in the channel.
Yeah, so the Morning Consult, and this is somewhat on the heels of a recent podcast we did with Evan Shapiro, talked about trust in media, and actually trust overall has slightly improved since, like, according to the Morning Consult. Pew Research or, you know, other places may have different opinions, but the one thing that's really important is the trust that people have in audio platforms like radio, like podcasts. They're seeing significant growth, especially among the younger audience. It was interesting in the research among Gen Zs. There's a pretty good percentage that has no idea what ABC, CBS, NBC even are. So go figure. And then you know, we always say that, you know, trust in media, especially when 70% of people distrust the media in the US, is at a premium. And that highlights the importance of going into trusted environments. Audio is a trusted environment, podcasts, radio. You know, you're going to be in a placing your ads that consumers trust and consumers believe in, which is important.
Well, and how much higher does it over index? And I'm interested to hear from the group why you guys think that this might be. Why this channel above other channels?
I think, I mean, you're inundated with possibly deep fake ads on social media all day long. So I think your antenna's up. For podcasts in particular, it's very intimate when you're listening, and you hear this person's voice, you're connected with them, you trust them, you're tuning in to listen to what these guys have to say. And I think it's an instant trust factor. So I don't know if it's that much better or everything else has just gotten that much worse. What do you think, Neal? Is everything getting worse, or?
I don't know if everything's getting worse, but social definitely sets a really good bar that almost any other media channel can exceed, right? I mean, social, I think, was the lowest trusted among all outlets. And we're getting a lot of our news now through social. We're getting a lot of our news not even as news. We're getting our news as headlines and then commentary on the headline, which maybe people didn't even bother to read the article itself, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and we should be careful because the headline that you've linked to is a headline from a company which is owned by iHeartMedia, and so of course they are going to love anything to do with radio and podcasts. So I would say that the data that this report talks about actually showed in 2020 podcasts to have less trust than social media. And now podcasts has significantly more trust. Podcasts have increased in trust from 27% all the way up to 47%, which is a tremendous increase. Radio at the top of the list, but radio does tremendously well in terms of trust pretty well everywhere in the world, with the possible exception of Eastern Europe and those sorts of areas. So, you know, you can see some pretty good numbers. What I think is most interesting is that every single media type has increased in terms of trust. There isn't a single piece of media which has actually gone down. And I think that that's interesting. I don't know how much of that is due to, this is American data, and I don't know how much of that is due to the president that you had. I nearly called him a prime minister. That would have been very, very British of me. The president that you have, I don't know whether that has something to do with it and the change of the media cadence over the last 4 years or so. But certainly interesting seeing, you know, the podcasting has seen the most and the highest increase in the amount of trust there.
Yeah, in that Morning Consult research, I think they specifically said that trust has grown among the Republican segment. So people that identify as Republican, and that where we had seen in other research, they were more distrusting of media than Democrats in general. So I don't know if it has anything to do with, you know, the change in going from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. If anything, you would expect it to go the other way. But Republicans have gained in trust.
Interesting. Well, I think you're seeing a lot more Republicans on the platform. I mean, I think there was a time when there might have been a few folks on the right, but so much of the conservative spoken word was synonymous with talk radio. And it does seem like a lot of that's shifted post-Rush. But you know, you've got Glenn Beck, you've got Megyn Kelly, you've obviously got the Daily Wires going in big. Mm-hmm. You've even got Ted Cruz with his own podcast. So like, I think that if you were on the sidelines and not trusting before as a conservative, you're now hearing, I mean, like I said earlier, it's pretty representative of all groups of people. And you're going to be a lot more likely to find something that you're into there if you weren't before. But I also wonder how much of it is just the nature of it. I think, Kyle, you may have been talking about this earlier. You have more time to unpack a topic. And so regardless of which individual group is growing, why wouldn't, on average, it be ahead of other channels? And I imagine it's because you just get to know somebody so much better when you're listening to a long form conversation, right?
Yeah, and that also goes to the last thing we talked about on my side, because one of the main reasons that women are listening more is because they talk about taboo topics. And for women, that's health and fitness, but for other people, it might be politics, it might be home repair, it might be their finances that they don't want to get into. You can't speak about these kinds of things on legacy media.
Now, Spencer, while you're here,
Yeah, I was trying to figure out a segue to go to the next story. So
I don't
speaking
have a
of
good
taboo
segue,
things-
but speaking of niche audiences, or you know what? Speaking
there
of
we go.
the way the podcast industry was at the beginning, Rooster Teeth is a company that we've been doing business with since the very beginning. One of the things, Alan at Rooster Teeth has been a partner to us for a decade. And I remember in the early days, we used to send out a report to all of the, networks or producers or, whatever they were at the time, because it wasn't very organized, but like we sent them a list of here's how you're performing rank ordered against your competitors for our clients that are advertising with you. And they showed up like third on a list of 10. And I talked to Alan about it. He's like, I don't ever want to be third on any list ever. And it just motivated them to over deliver for the client. Now they were independent at the time, and it was a different time. So let's fast forward a decade. And Spencer, what's happening over there?
Yeah, Rooster Teeth has been huge also in the YouTube space. They are some of the main architects of the beginning of YouTube and finding ways to monetize it for advertisers, both DR and brand. So it's been, gone from fledgling to full company in a very short amount of time. And it's honestly extremely sad to see it as it is now. It was acquired by Warner Brothers Discovery. And like many things that have fallen by the wayside, they have decided to close it, though they are trying to sell their produced shows, including Red versus Blue and Genlock, which is on Max now. And they're also trying to shop around the Roost Podcast Network, which is their produced shows. These include things like the Rooster Teeth podcast and Optic Gaming. But though they will keep selling things that they don't produce directly, but they have great relationships with. I love them as well. They have one of the highest success rates for testing of any of my clients. They have a really great sales team. What does this mean for the market? It can mean a couple of different things. It could mean that this is another, example of corporate gluttony at its worst, especially with the podcast boom during COVID. This could be the end of an era of large acquisitions, though I think that's not true because just today, Wondery and HeadGum were reportedly shopping around for new content to add to their slate. Or is this just another corporate entity not knowing what they're trying to sell and how to sell it? So I'd love to hear thoughts from anyone and everyone. What do we think?
Yeah, well, James, I'm interested if you've reported on this. Do you know the kind of cause of the demise that's circling around? What do we chalk this up to? Or at least what's the stated version?
Yeah, it does seem that it's the video stuff. The podcasting gets a mention. The Roost gets a little bit of a mention, but it does seem that it's the main podcasting stuff. And I think Warner Brothers Discovery have not had a particularly fun time over the last couple of years, and I think it may just be a case of wanting to save some money. The organization, from what I understand, has never. Not necessarily never been profitable, but never made an awful lot of cash. And I think that they may just be having a look at the bottom line and going, we need to make more profit. We need that fast. What can we get rid of? But it's a great shame. It's certainly been a part of pretty well any podcast conference I've been at has always been, whether it's AJ or some of the other folks, talking about how well that they've been doing and really being a leader for some of the video podcasts that we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So it's a real shame to see them go.
And do we know for a fact that they will no longer be producing any of them, or that they'll probably go and get picked up elsewhere and go back into production?
What we know is that the Roost's podcast network is continuing to trade as it currently is. they are finding a buyer for it. And I would guess that they will probably find a buyer for that relatively easily. So they're not going away anytime soon. The Rooster Teeth TV stuff is going to be, or video stuff is a little bit harder. But I think from a podcast point of view, it's pretty well business as usual right now.
Okay. Well, so takeaway there is be careful when you're dabbling in M&A, because you can get lost and deprioritized. And there is something to be said for independent teams that are going to fight for survival. So a cautionary tale. And we wish all our friends at Rooster Teeth well, of course. All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. You know, I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, you know, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com. Short story here. Podcast companies see sign of an improved ad market in 2024. Earnings calls are happening. Groups like iHeartMedia, Spotify, SiriusXM, Acast, all reporting revenue growth when they are speaking about Q4 of 23. And we're seeing an improved ad market going into 2024, which, you know, I think this is generally positive news. We like to see the industry going up and to the right. I think it's bittersweet because, you know, as James calls us back to, a lot of people have had to take on some hardship with a lot of the cost-cutting measures that have been happening. And, you know, unfortunately, I think that you probably don't have these types of reports if they don't take those measures. But then I think it can rub salt in the wound when you see anything they spend money on immediately thereafter. But, you know, look, we were all going, is a greater recession coming? You know, what type of global uncertainty are we walking into? And I think we got to live one day at a time, but it seems like things are probably pretty good for what we do, at least for this year. Does anybody have any take on that? And one kind of leading question is, does the election help? Do we generally expect to see that everybody's going to perform a little bit better in an election year and after a year where you've seen a lot of reductions?
We definitely think, I definitely think that like iHeart, Odyssey, Cumulus, those should see some bump from election dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it will affect podcasting as much. You know, I don't know how much political money will come into podcasting, just because I think the political spending is still pretty traditional. The majority goes into television, majority goes into local television.
Yeah, let me clarify my question a little bit, and I do want to
Yeah.
hear you complete the thought. But like, you know, we talk about the Taylor Swift effect. When she comes into a town, it changes the whole town's economy, right? And sometimes I wonder if people behave differently in an election cycle, partly because of the political ad dollars, but also, you know, listen, there's a lot of mayors and governors cleaning up cities right now in ways that they weren't doing a year ago because they're up for reelection, right? Or they're trying to win something. And I don't know if everybody starts putting their best foot forward, and as a secondary effect, new things start happening. Now, I'm not an economist, so I don't know if I'm just making stuff up here. But I do wonder if this is just like you generally see this around election time.
Yeah, I think the ad market turned a corner, and we know that from Q4, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of the ad market turning a corner, you're getting an influx of political ad dollars this year. So, and
plus cost reductions like crazy, everybody redoing their deals. So
yeah,
you're going to see a win. Well, and some people were talking about, I was listening to a show that was just talking about tech and a lot of the year-over-year comps, and they were comparing like Meta's returns versus Google's returns versus Snapchat, which didn't sound like it's doing very well. And what they're saying is, you know, you don't have to be doing awesome to look like you're doing awesome if you're just measuring yourself off of your comps when you did real bad last year, right? So there's also a chance that it's like, yeah, we maybe a company has taken a step back and it just took an inch step forward, but because they lowered the costs in the process, they look like they're doing everything right and expectations get reset. So
that is true. We have to sometimes remember what we're comping against, and some of those comps were really pretty bad. So the results now look really, really good.
Yeah.
But
James,
I think the only other thing I would add is, I mean, last year there was a lot of like, oh, is podcasting no longer like, you know, has it lost its luster? Has it lost its allure? I think we can move past that now.
yeah, that was clickbait. Although our friend Pete didn't help by exposing the the fake download issue, which I think has made a lot of people reshuffle. You know, you had Ezra or Ira Glass going on stage talking about how, I believe it was Ira Glass, forgive me if I'm misquoting here, but talking about how embarrassed he was that he had to restate how many listeners he had and how many downloads he had, because he was misquoting because they were overcounting their listeners, because the whole industry was, right? So like the ripples of that everywhere have been significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I mean, I think just that one change from Apple, which by the way, they said was a very small change, shouldn't have much of an impact. I mean, that cost Acast $7.2 million in contract revaluations. And if that's happening to Acast, it's happening to a bunch of other people. And let's not forget that there is still an awful lot of auto downloads that happen in the Apple Podcasts app. So it's not necessarily gone away, that. I think what it does show is that any change that Apple makes, no matter how small they flag them as being, are changes that we need to have a really close look at, and changes that they themselves need to be super careful in terms of what they do. I mean, I looked at the figures for January to January, so January 2024 to January 2023. And you could see that pretty well every major podcast network was down by 33% in terms of downloads. So that's got to come from
insignificant.
Not insignificant at all. Having said that, as you so rightly say, the industry is in a pretty good place now. There have been, I think it's fair to say that there was a little bit of overheating that has gone, and the industry, certainly in terms of revenue coming in, everybody is posting some pretty good numbers. Interestingly, the New York Times recently posting numbers that weren't quite so good as everybody else, and they partially blamed brand safety in terms of people not wanting to advertise around, Israel and Gaza and all of the other things going on. I don't know how fair that was, but it was interesting, seeing that kind of side, of it as well.
People are talking a lot about the loss of dollars from brands avoiding news. And if only some organization would come out with a tool that could measure not just what you talk about, but like how responsibly you talk about it. Like if you had a metric like civility or something that you could measure, that could really help brands. But we'll just wait for some company to come along and introduce. Oh, wait a minute. Have you heard of Seeker?
Good one, Dan.
Thank you. It's very subtle. Okay, Kyle.
I was just going to mention on that last one, the drop in downloads. I see this as a massive opportunity for podcast advertisers, especially those that have been on for a couple of years. I'm literally going through my catalog, and any show that was missed goal by 30-40%, we're going back and we're retesting this because the real listeners are still there, and now we're paying for those only. So
I agree.
I see it as a huge opportunity for marketers in the space. And nobody's talking about that. So there you go.
Well, don't tell everybody what we're doing here.
All right, cut that part. We'll cut that in post.
Pete did suggest it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, speaking of brand safety, Dan, I was on a call last week with a client talking about.
Now this is a transition.
I mean, I had a great show recommendation. We were talking about it, and they're like, "Oh, it's true crime. We don't do true crime because we don't want to be associated with death and murder," which I think is a fair argument. But the blokes down in Australia, IAB, did a test using a company called Neuro Insights, and they, put probes in people's brain and monitored brain activity while they were listening to true crime content and entertainment content. And there were ads placed in both pieces of content. And they measured the responsiveness, how much they remembered the ad, and how likely they were to purchase the brands that they heard on the ad. Come to find out, it's almost exactly the same. They did mention some really interesting things for advertisers who are actively advertising on true crime, that it's important to match the tone. Maybe disassociate yourself as much as possible from the content itself. You don't want to go, but first
we're Dove and we don't believe in murder.
Exactly.
I thought matching the tone would be including gunshots in your
exactly. Where killer deals this week only. But it gave some pretty good recommendations as far as like how to first, we know that we want to advertise on true crime. And if you're not, you should be, especially if you're looking for a female target audience. Secondly, it gives you some pretty actionable insights on how to actually advertise and how to adapt your current creative to fit and resonate a little bit better with that content.
Love it.
It's a really good piece of research. I mean, apart from anything else, it's really nicely laid out. Yes, it's from IB Australia, but it's not just Australian data. There's a bunch of data from the rest of the world in there as well. And it's just really nicely laid out in terms of, the crime, the suspects, the evidence, the verdict.
Yes.
They've had a little bit of fun with it. If there was one thing that I would say is don't release that IAB Australia on the same day as you release all of the spend numbers, which they ended up doing. And so, of course, nobody reported on this crime thing. I actually left it a week prior to reporting on it because I knew that it would be hidden. But it's a great piece of work. It's well worth taking a read of.
So the takeaway is, if you were concerned that some of the negative associations with murder would rub off on your brand, don't be afraid. Yeah, kill that thought. You're going to be fine. We're used to it.
Kill that thought. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Is it bad that most of their relatives are probably the people that the true crime people are talking about, since Australia is mostly convicts?
How
Is
I
dare
that-
wasn't
you?
gonna
What
go
a,
there,
what a
but
thing
if
to
it
say.
These are petty crimes. They were petty crimes, Spencer. Mostly
Do you-
tax debts.
Do you know, I have a very distant relative who was sent to Australia for, get this, stealing a woman's handkerchief. That was the heinous crime that he was sent all the way here for. 1978. Who'd have thought it? No, it was earlier than that. Who'd have thought it?
Well, Spencer, I'm glad you said it. Somebody had to say it. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think, look, we don't have a lot of time left here, but so let's stick to the important stuff. James, why did your ancestor steal a handkerchief?
I have no idea.
What was the motive?
I think he just wanted to blow his nose.
Seasonal allergies.
Fair enough. All right. Spencer, you're back.
I'm back.
Tell us about Spotify's domination.
Oh, well, in news that shocks no one and hasn't not been true for a long time, Spotify is still the largest hosting company in podcasting by a factor of 4. Hosting 31% of the new episodes in February, with Buzzsprout being the next largest at 8.8. And what does this mean? It means that between all of the updates for their tech, the marketplace discoverability, they also just have the numbers. They actually are the biggest in podcasting. So they're not going anywhere. And Neal, do you have any additional thoughts on this from, no?
I mean, I was like 30%. They have like their share is 30%, right?
It's pretty big, yeah.
It's nuts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's Spotify and a lot of little players, it seems like. That's what I see from that.
It does worry me a little between the fact that, I mean, we're always talking about the measurement piece and attribution. We have SPA that we're always thinking about. Does this worry you at all? Is there anything that the market could change, knowing that they're the ones who are the biggest?
Well, and I just want to clarify, we've got James fact checking us here in the chat. So James, what's your take on this before we move forward with any wrong assumptions?
Yeah, I mean, the really important thing here, just to bear in mind, is this is Spotify for podcasters, the podcast host that used to be called Anchor. So this is the entry-level podcast hosting company, which is free, which doesn't have an awful lot of advertising opportunity on there. So Megaphone is still big, but nowhere near as big as Spotify for podcasters. So I think that there's there's some interesting stuff there in terms of what you can and can't do in terms of advertising on a Spotify for podcasters show. Interestingly, when Joe Rogan left Spotify's internal wall and ended up making his show available everywhere, that was on the Spotify for podcasters platform for about 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden he's moved over to Megaphone, which I think probably tells you a fair amount about what they're actually doing there. To me, Spotify for podcasts is a great platform, but it's most certainly the entry-level service. And I think if you're a chief audio officer, the interesting thing for you is actually how many people Spotify end up pulling over to the Megaphone platform, which has so much more opportunity for podcast advertising.
Yeah, they just need a brand safety solution to deal with the long tail, right? Which I think has always been.
Can you think of any company that might help?
I really can't, but if
That's
I
your
think of one
memory.
later, yeah, I'll have to jog my memory if Seeker or no, but truly that's been, I think that's been one of the biggest monetization problems for smaller shows is that you just can't afford to go blind into 1,000 different podcasts, and you can't take the time to pick them one at a time, even though they may be great environments for you. So you can create all of the systems to aggregate it and to insert ads across, as many as you want to, but then where are you going to show up that you didn't mean to? And so I genuinely mean it. that system will never hit its stride until they can solve for that. Anyway, Neal, I'm going to give you last word here. It sounds like there's some stuff with AI and audio. What's going on there?
Isn't there always something with AI and audio?
We try to act like it, whether or not there is.
whether there's some,
we're playing it up.
the
big
real
time.
there, right? This is another thing. So why are podcast companies investing in AI generated podcast translations despite some questionable quality? So this is a study that was in Digiday. There's a whole PDF report available. It talks about iHeartMedia having plans to launch in mid-2024. They have delayed that a little bit. Other podcast networks like Spotify and Podcast Ones have announced similar initiatives to translate their podcasts using AI into other languages. There are, I guess, ongoing concerns about the quality, about the nuance of the translations, but it's moving forward. It's something it's going to happen. And I mean, for podcasters, for the companies, you gain 100,000 listeners via a Spanish version of an English language podcast. That's meaningful to them. So it's going to be pursued, and hopefully the translations get better, more understand the nuances better, and don't sound like they're AI generated as they are.
What I think is interesting is that they're testing, trying to actually use the host voice and their own inflection, just translate into a different language, which I think opens a lot of possibilities once they get it right. But right now it's like when you see those terrible translations of like English into English from companies, you're like, oh, but I think it'll get there. And I think it will open up a lot of opportunity for US-based businesses looking to expand into international markets.
I guess that's interesting that, you know, we're limited in how accurate our English transcripts are of English speaking shows. But if you have to then go and translate what's already not, it's like garbage in, garbage out, right? So maybe it would be simple if the English translation were better, potentially. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we have any multilingual people on the call. Giles joins sometimes and speaks like 8 languages, but it would be interesting to hear somebody that speaks 2 languages to hear the English version and the other language and know what that experience is actually like. Have any of you had that experience or heard about it?
I did go to VidCon last year, and they had software that they were testing out, and they had the first Mr. Beast translation. It was like an older Mexican man clearly doing the translation, and it was very like, you could tell it was somebody else's voice. It felt really weird. And then they did the Mr. Beast as himself translation, and it just sounded more true for the content. And I just was like, man, I didn't even realize this was like such an issue across the industry. And it made a difference for me, and I don't even speak Spanish, so.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of work going on. There's a company called Wondercraft, which one of the co-founders is Oscar Saranda from X of Acast, and and that's doing a bunch of very interesting voice cloning. I think they've taken Diary of a CEO, which is one of the top 5 shows in the UK. They've taken that and cloned the voice, made that into Spanish and a couple of other languages as well. So, you know, I think we're right at the beginning of this. The other thing, just to sort of bear in mind, is that there are a bunch of companies, one particular in Copenhagen in Denmark called Podster, and their entire business model is to take podcasts that work really well from one country, doesn't have to be English, could be anybody else, and remake them in other languages, because they know that the story works. They know that everything works in terms of the marketing and everything else. So they know that if they were just to take it and repurpose it into a different language, then that would work. And I think that's worthwhile keeping an eye on, because I think there's a There's a bunch of really interesting shows that are being made in other languages, and they re-record them into, into different languages so that they can take them into different markets.
I don't think anybody has anything to add to that. So this is where I'm just going to say thank you to each one of you, and thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers. It's a better experience if you view it, really because of Spencer's contribution. Thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and we want you to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we do have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, and to build bridges instead of burning them, while we preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer and you want to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, please reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by going to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer, which is edited by Kyle. We would love to hear from you if you have any feedback. That's info@mediaroundtable.com. And if you haven't heard about it yet, check out Ad Infinitum. This is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast hosted by the great Stu Redwine, head of creative services here. You can start with episode 1 and learn everything that it takes to make audio ads work and how to make them better. And he's got some great guests on and is now in their second season. You can get it in this feed or through the Ad Infinitum feed. It's a good time. You should check it out. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neal, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.
Welcome to the Canva guided meditation for stress at work. Impending deadline? Generate Canva presentations in seconds.
So fast.
Brainstorm got too big? Summarize with AI in a click. Writer's block? Release with Canva Magic Write.
Magical.
Stress less and save time at canva.com. Designed for work.